All right, welcome back to Firewall. I'm your host, Bradley Tusk. My guest today is a much better podcaster than me, Mike Pesca, who hosts The Gist, who I assume many of you listen to, and Mike is one of the best sort of conversationalists out there. So thank you for coming.
I feel the same way. We two sons of Nassau County.
Right, so Mike and I have actually known each other since like ninth grade.
Yeah.
In fact, we're even having dinner with the two of us and a mutual friend in 2 weeks.
Yes.
So Mike needed an episode on the New York City mayor's race, and I believe we leveraged it by saying, I'll come on if you come on mine. So
I'm very, like many political leaders, I'm purely transactional. I wouldn't have done it just to do it.
Never. So
what's in it for me, Tusk?
Right. So it's funny. So we were thinking about the best way to handle this, and our thought was, because like we asked you, like, what do you think of when you think of Mike Pesca? And everyone's like, that guy can talk about anything, right? Which, by the way, is true. So Mike and I met because we both did, shows you how nerdy we were, which is not, it sort of ended up like you would expect, I guess, model Congress.
You two know.
Yeah, and like I was pretty good, but he was the best. Like he was the legend. And basically we just still talk for a living, one way or another. So, what we did is we asked ChatGPT to tell us your last 25 interviews and what they thought the point was.
Okay,
and we wrote questions based on that.
Freaking amazing.
So not that we're going to get through all of them.
All right.
But part of the problem is when you talk to Mike, so many things come up. We had two topics before we started recording that I really like, so I'm going to start with those. The first one is the best sporting event you haven't been to. What was the context in which that even came up?
I think you were talking about going. You were talking
about the Indy 500, and you took it to the Triple Crown. And so the best one you have been to is what?
World Cup.
Okay, in South Africa.
Well, I do love the Olympics, but World Cup
So why slightly better?
Every game in the Olympics, every event for the participants are really important. But for everyone else, it's fun to see 10-meter air pistol. Yeah. But, it doesn't seem life or death.
Right.
But for the World Cup, it certainly does. And you can see Algeria versus Slovenia. And this is by far the most important moment in those countries in the last 2 years.
Right.
Amazing. And soccer is
How
the world
do you
game.
think, so South Africa, were they assumed to be a great soccer country before they hosted the World Cup?
You mean in terms of loving soccer?
Yeah,
they're not good at soccer.
Yeah.
Yes. Every country. There are 10 countries in the world that aren't, and Canada and the U.S. are two of them.
So like
Russia also a little.
Well, when Qatar had it, are they soccer crazy?
They do. Well, they import all the great players from throughout the world, but this is how they sports wash, which is fine. Like these phrases like sports washing, that's what you're supposed to do.
No,
right?
I have no problem with any athlete. I'm not a golf fan, but my son is, and so I know a little about live and all of that. Like, I don't have any problem with them taking the money. Now, Lyle, my son, says that when their contracts are up, none of them, he thinks, are going to go back to live.
I know, but that's probably for other reasons other than social disapproval. It is so...
Oh, no. Yeah, I think it's because they can't play in a lot of events. Right, it's just not as fun.
But when it came out, that was a major strain of criticizing the golfers that went to live, and people felt like they had to address this. And then I was just looking around like, do you think I don't like that Khashoggi was murdered and hacked up. I'm against that. But do you think...
So now I'm going to...
the average person cares?
Right. Now I'm going to slander, because I don't remember exactly which golfer it was, but Lyle, my son, showed me a clip. I think it might have been Greg Norman.
Yeah, it's probably Greg Norman. Yes.
And they asked him about Khashoggi, and he said, these things happen.
And he said in that Australian accent.
which was kind of fantastic. So the one you haven't been to or one or two that you most want to go to?
Well, do you remember what I said to you? There were so many.
Well, so you've been to 5 Super Bowls.
Yes.
You've been to the Olympics. You've been to the World Cup. You've been to the Final Four. Have you been to the NBA Finals?
Yes. I saw the Heat lose to the Mavericks and then the Heat win the next year. That was great.
Have you been to the World Series?
Many a World Series. Yeah, sure. That's always very good.
Right.
I think the major North American team sports I've been to. I want to come up with...
Stanley Cup Finals?
Have I been to Stanley? Yes,
I think it would be. I'm not a hockey fan, but I think that would be fun.
I know. Hockey fans are so impassioned.
And then heavyweight title fight?
I've been to, certain titles. Titles are always
they're
on
a little
the line.
vague these days. Right.
Yeah.
You said you've been to like the Preakness and the Derby and all of that, right?
I've never, the WNBA finals last year would have been fun.
You could have made it.
Here in New York.
And then...
All the legs of the Triple
Indy
Crown.
500?
No, never been to Indy 500. Never. I've been to Talladega, and that's fun for me sociologically.
Right.
And it's also, there's a lot of technology involved. They understand their fans, and they do a really good job. I think more Olympics or a Winter Olympics.
The problem with the Winter Olympics, it just feels like it's going to be cold.
It will be cold.
And that just doesn't do it for me.
Do you feel that way?
I do. I just, for some reason, will you go to LA for the Summer Olympics?
I'm probably not going to go to LA, but the stories have started. I've never covered an Olympics or a World Cup without and 3 years out, the cost overruns are already surprising people.
Well, but they have a specific, it's funny. So LA pre-fires was really the smartest choice because they have in the market 2 baseball teams, 2 basketball teams, 2 football teams, 2 hockey teams, USC, UCLA, soccer.
Stanford itself is a bigger venue than any country.
Right. Yeah. So they have all the sports facilities already. It was the fires that really fucked them up because politically, tell me if you agree with this, but so you have multiple competing problems. You have all these homes in Palisades and Alta Vista, or wherever, all these communities need to be rebuilt, right? Then there are some Olympic things that have to be built, like housing for the athletes, right? Then, because of tariffs, lumber, which comes from Canada, and sheetrock, which comes from Mexico, are more expensive. And then the people who do the work are being deported, right? And so you don't have the labor force. The materials are a lot more expensive. And you have these 2 competing things. And what's going to happen is you can't not build the stuff for the Olympics, but at the same time, when there's a limited amount of sheetrock and it's going to build housing for Belarusian weightlifters instead of some family that lost their home, it's going to be a fucking disaster.
And the homeless situation. So I know that they always say they're going to repurpose some of their housing for homelessness, but I don't know. As that becomes more acute, as you know, the budget of California, they had such surpluses during the pandemic and they had huge aspirations. And now they are in a terrible situation. And, part of I'm a huge critic of governance of California, and I was just reading, and I'm going to do a segment on I guess in a fit of compassion, made the laws about suing for sexual assault. They opened the laws, and they opened the statute of limitations. And guess what? Now the county of Los Angeles is on the hook for billions to pay settlements for sexual assault allegations that couldn't have even been brought before the laws were changed.
Sexual assault by public employees?
Yes. And there's a police department here, a school district there, California juries, you're supposed to allot what percentage is the fault of the individual and what percentage is the fault of the district. And they're always coming down 90-10 fault of the district. So there are all these terrible, I guess you could call them unintended consequences. But California is not
and to a certain extent,
state.
There's just, even if you did have enough money, if there aren't enough skilled people to do the work,
there's a lot
of professions like the medical profession or the hospitality profession or construction, where even if you have everything else you need, you need people who know how to actually do it.
Yes.
Right?
Can I ask you, during your time in the Bloomberg administration, where were you either personally or what were you obligated to say about Olympics in New York?
So, luckily, when I was there the first time, the only public-facing role I had was executive director of the Charter Commission, and that was about whether the public advocate would be mayor for the whole term or not. So amazingly, no one asked me about the Olympics.
Yes.
And then by the time I came back to run the campaign, we'd already lost the Olympics. So interestingly, Doc Roth and I once, this was a while ago, had a debate or disagreement where I said to him, Dan, it worked out perfectly.
Yes, that's what I think too.
You used the promise of the Olympics to get infrastructure projects funded that otherwise never would have happened. But then you'd actually have to have the Olympics, so you got to build Hudson Yards instead of a football stadium that would have had 8 or 9 games a year. It worked out perfectly. And he was like, no, the Olympics would have been much better. You're wrong. He was very insistent. I don't agree with him, but that was his. I was surprised. I thought he was going to claim victory because he was entitled to.
The football stadium on the west side was, I always thought that Bloomberg got a little bit lucky in that he had a couple really bad ideas and they got defeated. Now, credit to him for accepting the defeats, but I thought the West Side Stadium was a terrible idea.
Well, I'll give you more interesting. So 2 of the bigger failures were the Olympics and congestion pricing. Mm-hmm. Even though congestion pricing did end up happening, seems to be working, and the Olympics worked out for the best. The guy who ran both of those and failed, 2 of the bigger, most high-profile affairs, then became the CEO of Bloomberg LP and did great.
Sure.
So but only Mike Bloomberg would have that kind of vision in some ways to do it. So the other thing we were talking before we started was, and you just brought this up, is there a single good world leader in the last 20 years? And we got a couple of names out there, but we really struggled.
Yes.
So what was the context for why you started talking about this?
Well, Corey was mentioning his time in Uruguay, right?
Oh, right.
And the former Uruguayan presidente.
Mujica.
Yeah. Mogi recently died, and he's a guy who took a vow of poverty and also really helped the Uruguayan economy. And I don't know if people know this, but you could tell them, Corey, that is a very advanced country, and it very much didn't used to be. Am I right?
He has a fascinating backstory. He was sort of a guerrilla fighter against the far right military junta that they had not only in Argentina but also Uruguay, and he lived in a cave or a hole in the ground for like 2 years or something, hiding out from them. So he was always this like populist folk leftist leader. And then he became president in like the mid 2000s and helped it get on the map as sort of like this populist left-wing paradise with better universal health care, legalizing weed.
Yeah. And if you look at the rankings from Freedom House or these other entities that say what are the freest countries, Uruguay's always like 9.3, 9.5, better than the United States in terms of freedom. The people love him. He's a little bit part Dalai Lama, part Lulu da Silva if he didn't have scandals. Right. So credit to him. Who else is on the list? It's a short list.
So you threw out Obama, fair enough, right?
I really liked Obama.
Yeah, I mean, I think
style-wise, for sure.
The thing with Obama, it was purely that what it took to get him elected then invariably meant a lot of disappointment afterwards because you just couldn't fulfill our structure. It wasn't like the entire structure of U.S. government and politics changed as a result. This guy got elected. The ACA came on the heels of it. That was transformational. But like, did you read his 800-page autobiography when it came out?
Probably. Yeah.
I did, and the answer was like not that much else really. He had excuses for each thing, and they weren't wrong.
Well, sometimes
not that much
I'll give you a small example. So I've been. Oh, by the way, other world leaders: Oscar Arias.
I'm going to go with Pope Francis.
But a lot of Catholics. I bet you Pope Francis, though now there's great affection for the former Pope. I think a lot of Catholics really dislike the direction he was taking the church.
Yeah, although interestingly, I thought the Cardinals were going to use the moment we're in and all of the world leaders who we sort of don't like as the excuse to really seize power, take things in the other direction. And they didn't do that with Pope Leo, which I was really pleasantly surprised by.
I think that they stick a lot more to doctrine than world affairs, and they see themselves outside of it, right? Like less making the point. It's more important to them, internal church doctrine and things that me as a half Jew and you as a Jew don't think about that much.
He checked a lot of boxes, right? But I did think that it was a nice, I thought they kind of, maybe that wasn't their motivation, but they kind of stepped up in the sense that at a time where the world needed some affirmation that like humanity has some value, I thought they actually did signal that.
Yes.
What about Zelensky?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yes.
That's a great one. And then you mentioned Ardern in New Zealand.
Yeah, Jacinda Ardern. And I also
would early Trudeau count? He sort of ended really badly.
No,
but I don't remember. Not. What was he like early? I don't remember.
Well, I mean, he won on a wave of being good looking. And I guess his critics would say what we call wokeism, that there was an appetite for it and there got to be much less so. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it was that skilled a political operator. I think we both said Merkel was good. Yeah. I think Oscar Arias was good. I think that, there
Macron?
Not really. Like massive rise of extremism.
So I'm admittedly in front of a computer right now, so I Googled. And a lot of other people are also saying back in South America, the current president of Argentina, Milei, who's very fringe. Who's very fringe.
He's only been a world leader for a few months.
But has totally got their crazy inflation under control, which no one could do for a long time.
Yeah, and my friend who's an economist says all the smart economists with any tie to Argentina who aren't devout leftists are really impressed and thinking of working for him. So,
by the way, whoever runs Singapore is probably on the list.
Oh yes, of course.
Right.
But
don't know who it is. But
yeah.
Well, not a democracy.
No, they're
kind
a
of
very functional country.
Yeah,
but the fact that there's such a short list. And
do you think New York City could be a successful city-state?
Yes, of course. But Bloomberg has to run it. I don't think it could be a successful city-state if we elect our leaders the way we elect our leaders. Right. So maybe with mobile voting or some other way to get out of
and then would you
exactly what you talk about.
If you were the czar of city-state construction, Would you just the 5 boroughs? Would you work in Long Island and Westchester? Would any of Jersey make it?
I'd want to. Yeah. They'd have to prove themselves, and we could trade out Staten Island for Newark.
Staten Island would have to audition for it?
I think so. We'd have to. Because, they always make noises about wanting to defect once New York was a successful city-state.
That's true. I'm always of the view, I've been writing every 3 years, I write an op-ed for the Staten Island Advance, where I'm just like, if you want to leave, leave. No problem. But the thing that no one seems to get is, with the exception of cops, if you were a New York City employee, you have to be a New York City resident. So many Staten Island residents are municipal employees. If you'd said, yeah, we're not changing the law for you, so you're going to have to move to one of the other 4 boroughs, you'd have a massive outflow of wealth and tax base or massive unemployment.
Well, who would that help and who would that hurt? I mean,
it would be the argument for why the referendum would ultimately lose, because everyone who's a city worker or is related to a city worker would realize that they were fucked.
The obvious answer is you grandfather the current ones in.
But if you were the mayor of New York City and you don't want to lose them, you'd be like, do what you want, but I'm not changing this law. That's it. And I'd just leave it at that.
Well, it's at least put you in a good bargaining position. I like our hypothetical.
Well, I'm not sure. What could Staten Island bargain? What do they have to offer? Well, what could they give you in return for their freedom?
They'd have to, I guess, bags of gold, or
I will say, as I mentioned, my son,
the heads of heretical people from Trenton. I don't know.
So I'm actually there more than I've ever been, because my son, as I mentioned, plays golf, and we actually joined the Richmond County Country Club, which is the country club on Staten Island, and he plays golf there. And so I have been going out there with him. There are some really good things. It's actually a really nice course, and I just if the weather's nice, I'm happy to just kind of walk around it. We go for great Italian food afterwards. The houses, there's Toad Hill is the neighborhood, and that's where all the old mob bosses used to live. So the houses on the course are like if they were movie sets of the most rococo, over the top, whatever. They're fun to watch.
The old argument for if you lose Staten Island used to be, where will we put our garbage? But that's done now. Now the answer is Pennsylvania.
There's a really good do you know Ravi Gupta, who hosts a podcast? What's the name of Ravi's podcast? Lost Debate?
Lost Debate.
Yes,
he just did it.
And he wrote a novel, I'll grab you a copy here, called Garbage Town, about Staten. He grew up on Staten Island. His dad was, I think, a cop. And he wrote a really good novel that just came out a few months ago about Staten Island.
That's awesome. I did not know that.
Yeah. So, all right, I'm just going to throw questions at you, and you just off the cuff. Do regular Americans want to see the Ivy League destroyed?
Yeah, but they might not be right about that. I mean, this is my take on the Ivy League. So much of what they've done and so much of them finding themselves in the crosshair is of their own doing.
Yes.
But it's stylish and it's a pose. And if you just quantified the amount of actual research that they put forward that saves people's lives, of course we'd want that. And I think I said this on the show. It's it'll be great to knock the Ivy Leagues in the nose, but how many years further down do you want to put off solving Alzheimer's disease? I want Alzheimer's disease cured as soon as possible.
Right.
And I'm not willing to take...
So just make Cornell the sacrificial lamb.
Well, I don't... I'm just saying that I don't think that the frisson of excitement of sticking it to a gender studies department is worth all that. And I also think, well, what do you think about this? That if there were no Ivy League, every country has elite institutions, and a lot of other countries, they're much more important. You literally can't get a job unless you graduate from the elite institution of South Korea or France. So the Ivy Leagues are a little more meritocratic, not very. But I just think if we started from scratch and we had something like American society, there'd always be something like the Ivy League. There'd always be the top few schools.
Look, there's New York City, right? I mean, there are people who are
magnets for talent.
Yeah. And by the way, so there are a lot people who live here, especially who come here from somewhere else, tend to often be really highly ambitious, motivated people who want to be here.
Also connected, and they start off from a position usually in the top half of society, let's say.
Yeah, often for sure. But also you can argue, that if you're not built that way, that might actually be better, right? There is an argument that all the ambition that I have or you have, has people listening to us right now, but at the same time fuels this constant discontent of like, I got to do more. I got to do more. And like we did, like some point this year on the podcast, we did a draft of character traits and personality traits. And I thought geniality was in some ways maybe the best pick.
Because not grit. You'd want grit for your kids.
But here's the thing. So grit, all these other things are I will have these things. So let's say intelligence, right? Why do you want to be smart? So I can be successful. Why do I want to be successful? So I can then do the things I want to do. Why do I do things so I can be happy?
Yeah.
If you're just genial naturally and you can cut through all the other shit, like, isn't that the best thing you could be?
Yeah, you're saying genial, you're equating it with optimistic, or in situations where things are up for interpretation, you'll interpret them well.
Yeah, and just generally speaking, you're happy-go-lucky. Yeah. You're not letting little things bother you. So you enjoy chit-chat with strangers.
You're describing me, and in fact, I have something called anandamide, which is the Bliss Molecule, right? I don't experience anxiety like other people do. I don't perseverate on things.
And this is like a true thing that you're saying?
Yes.
How did you learn this?
I read the description of what it was and talked to some experts.
Were you tested for it?
No, I've not been tested.
Can you be tested for it?
I think you can if they discover it and it's in a gene. Anyway.
You just think you might have it.
And experts have agreed that if anyone has it, Mike, you do. The checklist is like, I'm off the charts. There are a lot of negatives to it, right?
What are the downsides?
Well, my wife would say I don't experience threats correctly, and therefore she feels a little less safe, right? I interpret things perhaps overly positively. I think things are going to work out, and often they do, but maybe you could argue, she definitely would argue, that if I saw things a little more, quote, realistically, I'd not try a little harder, but put a little more stock and effort into it. Anxiety is good for society.
Well, it's look,
not unchecked anxiety, but some degree.
Well, so negativity bias is an evolutionary trait that was literally like, those are the lions, go the other way.
In fact, there's a new line of thinking that it's the evolutionary trait.
You smell gas, get out of the house.
We are prey. Everything that we do is through the prism of harm.
Interestingly, so I'm going to brag about this, but my 3 o'clock meetings with Rutger Bregman. Do you know him?
Yeah.
He's coming here at 3 o'clock.
With him also.
You can say hi.
He was on Persuasion with Yasha Monk last week.
And if his book, Humankind, I thought that until I read that, what he persuaded me was that it's actually cooperation that ends up being the greatest evolutionary trait, as opposed to sort of negativity bias.
Well, that's what got us where we were, but his last name's Gray. He's a philosophy professor that I had on the show. Noah Gray, can't remember. And the New Yorker just wrote about him, and he very much rebuts Jonathan Haidt and says we're a prey species. Everything that we do, all of our emotion, all of our moral intuition is based on harm. And so we might define harm differently.
Would you say he has like a zero-sum Trumpian view of the world, this guy?
No, he just thinks I don't know, but I don't think so. He's a kind, forward-looking guy, but I don't think he's transactional. He just definitely thinks that for so long we were, eaten by animals, and we're still operating on that basis.
Yeah, I mean, like, have you ever gone on safari?
Yes. Well, when I was in the World Cup in South Africa.
Right. Okay. So I remember one of the things that was really cool, we went twice, was there was like a leopard that we had spotted earlier. We had the Jeep, so you move faster. And then
no pun intended, of course.
We got to the next spot.
Spots, yes.
And then the guide said, listen, and there was like an alarm system of each like bird and animal telling each other, hey, this predator is coming.
So cool.
Watch out, right? And they all were sort of aware of it, and they were cooperating. And it sort of put those two traits at direct conflict, which was like, one is the ones who don't eat die. So like you can't really, there's no moral judgment about the fact that they eat each other, because like how else are they going to survive? On the other hand, they do band together in various ways to try to cooperate and stay safe and everything else. And so, the two things are always in, I don't know if it's not harmony, maybe it's in conflict, but they're both coexistent at the same time.
Right. These are the traits that define species. Let me go back to the Ivy League and ask you, I have an answer to this. You went to an Ivy League school undergrad?
Yes.
Are people who go to Ivy League schools smarter? I know the standard answer is something like, I've met plenty of idiots at Ivy League schools. I met geniuses who never at college.
So here's my answer, which is going to sound political, but it's not, which is Penn is like the least intellectual of the Ivy League schools. And then I went to the University of Chicago for law school, which is the most intellectual school in the country, right? So to me, the difference between the two was so staggering that therefore, in comparison, my answer is no, they're not smarter because they certainly weren't smarter than my class. Now, a lot of my classmates in Chicago had gone to Ivy League colleges for undergrad.
And they were selected from, they deselected out the dummies from the Ivy League.
For sure. But I happened to go to this, like, the least rigorous Ivy League school and then the most rigorous university in the country.
Yeah.
So I'm in some ways a bad person to ask this question to.
This is what I think. I think probably, like, if you want to say IQ test, if you want to redo an IQ test to specifications, yes. Most people who go to Ivy League schools will test certainly above average. But what I think, they have one specific type of intelligence that I see over and over again. They're good writers. They write their way in while in an Ivy League school. They're able to write. And
that's just from the education they receive.
I think it's usually going in. I think that
when the people who have a higher
school,
chance of going in are getting better educations and therefore.
Well, I don't even know if it's education. Writing ability is but one type of education. I don't know about the hard sciences. When I've done hiring and I see Ivy League, non-Ivy League, there's a huge swath of difference. But consistently, the Ivy League students will have been good writers.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my kids go to a school that really focuses heavily on English. Like, their English department is probably their best department. And both of my kids are, like, really good writers.
Some of it's genetic, and I'm not just saying that.
Perhaps, yeah. Both of their parents have written multiple books, yes. But I think it's also because the school is so intensely focused on it. So I think you can learn to be a competent writer without any ability. And then ability is probably what gets you from being a competent writer in the workplace, wherever it is, to someone who can publish books or columns or whatever it might be.
And a problem I see, I think it's a problem, is that oftentimes the people we elevate as public intellectuals are really only good writers. They're not great thinkers. And there is a correlation. And oftentimes, if you write excellent thoughts on paper, then you're a good writer and a good thinker. But I think the New Yorker is stocked full of people who write a pretty sentence or a flowing sentence or a sentence where they know how to manipulate the audience. But that doesn't mean, and often they are not good, rigorous thinkers.
Yeah, they're not necessarily the same thing at all. That's why I think, in a way, podcasting has emerged because it creates a new venue for people to think vigorously and rigorously in a way that doesn't necessarily require them to be great writers and is a much more accessible medium for people. And why do you think this, agree or disagree, and then if you agree, which I think you will, why? The bond between the podcast host and the listener is more intimate than any other bond in any form of media.
Yeah, that's what we always, true.
And I feel it.
Yeah, that's what we always said on NPR. It's the most intimate medium.
But not radio, podcast.
But I think some late night radio, if you listen to, I used to listen to a guy named Ira Fistel, who was out of LA, and he was on the WABC when I was like 9 years old, and he talked about A Passage to India. Remember that E.M. Forrester movie? But I have a lifelong bond with that guy. Or
not Steve Summers?
But some sports talk people, I am more bonded to Mike Francesa than any sports writer that I know, and I still seek him out. And I can't remember the guy who used to always talk about UFOs and that phenomenon. He had a real bond with the audience, especially the overnight audience.
Yeah, crazy people. Speaking of crazy people,
Allison Steele, the Nightbird on WNEW. This was
I would say the podcast, because it's fun. Like I went to a dinner like, I don't know, 2 months ago with Derek Thompson, and I don't know Derek, but I listen to his podcast a lot. And by the way, he's like a kid.
I know. It's annoying.
Like, I thought he was like the intern working the dinner. I literally didn't recognize him. But I was a little like, oh, I know you, even though I really don't know him at all. Right?
Your podcast fans, your fans of your writing, or are there? Yeah, I'm sure they're fans of your political work, will come up to you and say, oh, yes, I know your work, and talk to you from that perspective. Fans of your podcast will come up to you and begin mid-sentence, with something that you said. Because
when we were at I got to do a TED Talk in April on mobile voting, and when Laurel and I were there, someone came up to her and started talking to her, and she's like, how do you know me? You're like, oh, well, Bradley talks about you a lot on the podcast. And then she's like, that's fucking weird.
I was just at this Ideas Festival in Seattle, and there was a woman there who, my production company is called Peach Fish Productions, because pesca means peach in Italian and fish in Spanish. And she had knitted me a bag that was half peach and half fish. She was this.
I hope you knitted her something in return.
Yeah, we just kept knitting back and forth. Yeah, like in Tale of Two Cities.
The new Etsy.
Like Madame Defarge giving. But the bond was unbelievable. And Jake Tapper, much more famous than I, no one knitted him anything
Nothing.
related
Tapper's
to yes.
walking around barefoot. So getting back to so if you take my argument that the gene that you have is sort of the thing you would pick first. Is being a sociopath good or bad? We always
For who?
The sociopath.
It's probably good for them.
That's what I think too.
Of course, but
Bad
of
for
course
everyone
it's good
else.
for the sociopath. That's why they're sociopaths.
Right. Now, but the argument against it would be they're so limited that while they don't feel guilt or shame or anything else, they also can't feel anything really that great. So they can't feel love. They can't feel true, like friendship. Deeper bonds between human beings are also inaccessible to
I
them.
think this is the story non-sociopaths tell themselves
You think
to
so? 'Cause
justify
that
not
they're
being
not a sociopath?
sociopaths.
Yeah.
This is like a lot of people say that about Trump, but is he really happy? And I always say, given his definition of happiness, yes, he has sex with porn stars. That's all he wants. Yes, he's rich. He has gold toilets.
Well, and then I don't know if Stormy Daniels did have a quote at one point where it was weird because it was like she was defending Trump, but she was like, well, if you had that kind of money and could do all that, that's what you would do too. Right?
That flatters her, right?
Right.
I'm the apotheosis of the world's greatest
Actually,
wealth.
I did. There was a book, this was got to be 25 years ago, it came out called Gig, and it was like essays about just different kinds of jobs. And there was a guy who was a porn star, and he was just like, it's awesome. Like, I thought, like, no, it's horrible. I'll get AIDS, this, that. He's just like, it's fucking great. I was like, all right, I
that
guess.
Thing you think, that thing that people who don't understand the business think, that's the right thing.
All right, what does your dog actually understand about you?
Well, I don't have a dog, but my cats, what do my cats understand? I think that they're sociopaths. So they're just in their own
like,
world.
Fuck Pesca.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. When I had a dog that we had to put down a few weeks ago. And thank you. And people, first of all, human beings really love dogs.
Yes.
Right? In a way, I have a friend who, he's now a judge in LA, but he was a homicide prosecutor. And he said that when he was coming up, the easiest conviction was animal cruelty.
Yep.
Easier than anything you could do to a human being.
It's true. I mean, this is when that lion, what was the name of the famous lion, was shot? I should remember
Simba?
the name. The dentist from Minnesota who shot a lion on safari. And of course, the lion became an international celebrity. Right. There's something about cruelty to animals. Here's a theory. Dogs are the humans of the canine kingdom and wolves are the sociopaths. So dogs are the feeling humans because how did dogs become dogs? They ingratiated themselves by maybe they're the sociopaths. They ingratiated themselves by understanding our emotions and having those big baleful eyes where the wolves were like, screw this. I've got canine incisors. I'm going to use them. And now look at wolf populations versus dogs.
Yeah, I'm with you more on the cats as a sociopath. They just sort of do what they want without worrying about it.
Yeah, that's what my cat understands about me. That guy's tall. I could use him to get up to the armoire, and so he does.
Yeah. So what's the weirdest belief system you ever found yourself buying into?
I think this is a little lame about me, but I'm so mainstream in my beliefs.
Any conspiracies you believe in?
I have to be wrong, but I literally don't believe in any conspiracies that are real conspiracies. Like, I was just reading that 2/3 of Americans believe that Lee Harvey Oswald didn't act alone, but I do.
You do?
I believe he acted alone.
Really? To me, that seems like an irrational point of view.
I know, but it's...
Corey, what do you have a view on that
had to prove it?
Did Lee Harvey Oswald act alone in your view? No, right?
That is not a conspiracy theory that people of my millennial generation, I think, pay too much attention to.
We were born a decade after that. But I guess it was still only a decade, so it was relevant. What year were you born?
90.
Yeah, so you were born 27 years later. So 10 years
So
later.
does this mean second gunman, or does this mean putting him in position? What is not act? Maybe it's
something. It's just the idea that, the magic bullet and all that, Meanwhile,
I don't think the magic bullet has been, I wouldn't say disproved, but it wasn't magic. Right. Bullet, from what I understand, and have you been to the museum in Dallas where you could be right at the perch?
I've been to the grassy knoll.
Yes,
but I've been
that's right next door.
Yeah, but I didn't go to the museum. Someone just, we were driving by, so I was like, "That's the grassy knoll." I'm like, "Okay."
When you saw it, didn't it blow your mind? Like, it always had this. I'll give you another instance, Kennedy related, where it blew my mind. Like, that's the grassy knoll. I don't know what I thought it was, but a mountain. I made it into a mountain.
Right,
what is a knoll? A knoll?
Right.
It's a patch of highway. It's nothing.
It's like that. I remember one time we were in San Antonio and we decided, let's go visit the Alamo.
Yeah.
And this was, I think, before GPS and cell phones. And we're driving around, and we can't find the Alamo. We passed it 14 times. It was so small. And we're like, that can't be it.
And there's no basement. Also, here's the other Kennedy-related thing. One of the first stories I did, JFK Jr.'s plane goes down, and I drive up to Massachusetts for NPR. So I'm outside the Kennedy compound. And I don't know what I expected. Like, they call it Camelot. I've been to Buckingham Palace. I didn't expect it to be palatial, but there were a few houses, and it's nice because it's right on the ocean.
It was underwhelming.
It was unbelievably. It's clapboard houses. I know this is a word. What does it mean? It just means a house, a wood house, a kind of small wood house.
Shingles,
Yeah.
The Kennedys are always...
The Kennedy compound.
Always. I kind of do believe in the conspiracy that the NBA draft is fixed.
Really?
Yes.
This last
one?
In
general, right? So like starting with the Knicks getting Ewing in 84.
That helps. Yeah.
Then you had the Cavaliers... LeBron leaves, they get the first pick, that's Kyrie.
Right.
He comes back, they get the first pick, which then gets traded for Kevin Love.
And then
Luka.
This last one with Cooper Flag. So it would have worked. The conspiracy would, for it to work, they don't want to reward the Cavs. What they'd want to do was get Luka out of there. So months before they would say, don't worry, Dallas, we're giving you Cooper Flag.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Or Anthony Davis, because, the best player always has to be traded to the Lakers by law, gets traded from New Orleans to the Lakers.
And so much sturm and drang.
Zion turned out to be a kind of a bust, but they got Zion, right? There's a bunch of examples of that. So I'm willing to believe in some of that. I mean, look, if you're in the NBA right now, you're like, fuck, Indiana, Oklahoma City.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Isn't this the Texas sharpshooter fallacy? You know what that one is?
No.
A random assortment of gunshots, then someone goes and draws the circle and say, look, you're a sharpshooter, retroactively. We could look at the draft and say, look at all the teams that benefited. What about the teams that didn't? You really can tell me that
there were these big narrative...
That Duncan going to San Antonio helped anyone?
But there are these big narrative shifts in the NBA. Or how about this? Wemby going to San Antonio, it's not because it was that the league said, this guy is a generational talent. The Charlotte Bobcats will fuck it up.
Yeah.
So San Antonio, Popovich, that whole organization will know what to do. They'll get it right. They're really good at this. We're sending them there.
But there were no Bobcats when that happened, of course.
That was 2 years ago.
But Charlotte's not the Bobcats.
What are they?
The Hornets.
Oh, the Hornets, right.
Sure. New Orleans was the Bobcats.
Fair,
yes.
Right. Or the Wizards.
yes. The Zords.
Or
yes.
Whatever.
The Bullets.
What issue have you genuinely changed your mind about recently?
Recently? Well, tell me where I am on this. I think a lot about policing like you do. I think a lot about murder and homicides. So I'll just go back and say every year on my show, I have a week called I Was Wrong Week.
Okay.
So it's a really good exercise. You'd think maybe you'd get more criticism by admitting it or you'd open yourself up, but maybe due to the nature of podcasting, it's a closed system. You have your fans and your group and they appreciate it. So a couple of years ago, I was pretty sure, this is exactly in your wheelhouse, that when the courts decreed that stop and frisk had to end, we were going to see a concomitant rise in crime and homicide. And it didn't happen. And so on my show, I said,
it did eventually.
That's the thing. I pre-admitted that I was wrong, but I don't know that I was wrong.
No, I mean, the amount of shootings that we have, and I did see a nice stat that this year has been better in terms of actual homicide.
Oh, yeah, the lowest shootings through May.
And we talked this on your podcast a couple weeks ago, but the problem isn't actually things like murder. Those are good stats and they're good New York Post stories. Mm-hmm. It's the feeling of being unsafe, right?
Yes.
It's the anxiety. And I would say...
And your shit theory is a good one, too.
Yeah, and just generally speaking, if you're on the subway and if 1 in 4 times... There's something about it that either is disgusting or makes you feel unsafe. And a mentally unstable person makes you feel unsafe. You forget the other 3 completely. And therefore, when you get polled, is Eric Adams doing a good job? No. Is New York City safe? No. Right? Yeah, and the one of the things with crime is the perception reality gap. So yes, actual crime might have gone up meaningfully post ultimately stop and frisk. Ironically, the thing that New Yorkers are upset about is actually not a flat out crime issue. It's a sort of mental health, drug addiction problem that results in a real feeling of anxiety.
But that wouldn't have been stopped or thwarted by stop and frisk. Stop and Frisk got guns off the street. That made crime go down.
You know what Stop and Frisk would have done? Other subway crime and violence not related to mentally ill people would have been a lot lower.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have had that portion of it.
I'll give you, okay, so here's what I was wrong on.
Yeah.
When the preliminary statistics out of Sweden were published during the COVID pandemic, I said, this is a disaster. You're killing people. What are you doing? The American right or the libertarians keeps pointing to Sweden and you're doing a terrible job. And it turns out I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a whole list. This is I was wrong. Some of these are pretty small. I thought that Aaron Rupar would have no career post Donald Trump won. This is very niche. You know this guy?
No.
Oh, his job is to put video clips of crazy things conservatives say. And he used to work for Vox or something. I'm like,
and now he's back at it again.
Well, it's never stopped. I was wrong about the joint U.S.-European price cap on Russian oil not being workable or helpful. It was a little bit helpful. I was wrong. Here's a big one. I never named the shooter, after a mass shooting, and I thought that it was wrong to do so. And a lot of people agree with me, even like Dana Lash on her podcast. I'm not going to name the shooter, and Ben Shapiro is not going to name the shooter. And I thought the notoriety of the shooters inspired other shooters. I think it's just engaged in magical thinking to think that not naming the shooter does a thing.
Even though sometimes you'll see that a shooter is quoting other shooters or studied them or whatever.
Yes, but I think if you look at the media, newspapers and such.
The media is making something about themselves? Really?
But I do think there's this more concerted effort not to name the shooter than almost anything else. And it doesn't do a thing. It doesn't do a damn thing. But that's okay. Sometimes you just engage in these things for some version of civic hygiene, right? You'd like it to be so.
Yeah.
So you just act as if, right? Categorical imperative.
Any others?
Yeah, I was a little, I think a little wrong about. Here's a big one. I, for the first time ever, endorsed Kamala Harris, and I had three big reasons. One was January 6th, can't get over it, won't get over it, done, full stop. Okay. Not wrong about that.
Yeah.
Two is Ukraine, was very motivated by keep funding Ukraine, also not wrong about that. Then I thought that how wokeness would play out is that Kamala Harris, if elected, would calm things down, but Donald Trump would just gin things up. But the exact opposite happened. There was the vibe shift. I have a lot of reasons why. I think for me, and these are all like very intangible, right? Ethereal things, the vibe shift and wokeness and these ideas. But I think that there was so much less substance to it. And once someone came and sliced through it like a Gordian knot, there wasn't a real effort to, keep enforcing woke orthodoxies, if you want to call them that.
Because ultimately, anytime there's like a petty tyranny, look, is there a kernel of truth to all that stuff? Sure. Concepts of diversity or equity, inclusiveness are not inherently bad concepts.
A lot of these are great
on their own in a vacuum.
Like inclusivity, is that bad?
But good. Just like what Joe McCarthy did in the 50s, anytime that someone sort of uses that culture to seize power and police what everyone else can say and think and do, everyone else fucking hates it. There's I see with my son and a lot of teenage boys, like in New York, for example, who go to these very, very progressive private schools. They want to go to college in the South, right? Because basically they're told by the social justice coordinator of their school every day how evil they are because of their race or gender.
Because there's no difference between toxic masculinity and masculinity.
Right. And so eventually they're like, go fuck yourself, right?
Yeah.
And so that all resulted. One area where I have found that I've changed my mind and now I've landed in confusion is drug policy, right? So I was of the typical Silicon Valley, University of Chicago, legalized drugs because the only force more powerful than the Sinaloa cartel is Johnson & Johnson or Unilever or whatever it is. And at least they will have to play by some set of rules. So, for example, the cartels are heavily economically incentivized to put fentanyl to products because it increased their profits margin significantly. In theory, Kraft would not be doing that, right? So
it's funny that you use Kraft as the example because, there's a lot of scholarship to say that after the cigarette companies couldn't make their money on cigarettes, that's when RGR and Nabisco and that's when the other cigarette companies bought processed food companies, which are also specifically addictive.
It's funny. I wonder if they have an ETF where you could buy and short companies based on GLP-1 spread.
That's interesting.
Yes. Because I do think that would affect.
What would FanDuel? What would the gambling
you would short
companies
those guys.
do?
So
of course.
Gambling would get short. I thought so. The problem is there's a lot more to short than there is to buy. Right. So you would short gambling. You short alcohol. You would short sort of there is no publicly traded drug companies in the U.S. Narcotic. Yeah, but there will be. You would short probably some processed food stuff. I guess you'd buy like fitness.
Would you buy fitness?
Yeah,
Don't people feel they have to go to the gym because they're eating a lot?
I don't know. I think that it creates a mentality for people that makes them like feel good about and being healthy.
Well, you're definitely short Weight Watchers, right? That's done already. There's nothing left to short. I don't think. Yeah.
So I was in that camp, and it was logically right. And then when the botched rollout of cannabis here happened, it really changed my mind. Because what I saw was these thousands and thousands of illegal weed shops pop up in this gray market where the state legalized it, but was so wildly ineffective and bureaucratic that it took them 2.5 years to issue any licenses. So as a result, this other market sprung up. That is a market that will obviously sell to anybody, and the products they're selling are completely unlicensed and uninspected. And I've seen this in the sense that I have not, luckily in this case, either of my kids, but plenty of others who are teenagers, or I've talked to the principal of the school about it. Like, you have this whole generation of New York City teenagers who are like hooked on weed because they can get it literally anywhere. And it's not like when we were, model Congress, where like we'd go to a party and somebody had like some oregano in a joint, and we'd be like, ooh, we're gonna get high. Like, this is like strong shit. And if you're smoking it all day off a vape, like, you're going to get effectively the same impact as any other hard drug.
I submit that you have not changed your mind, because if I told you 5 years ago that we're going to legalize drugs, but we're going to do it entirely half-assed and without any attention to detail, you'd say that's going to go badly.
Yeah, maybe so, but maybe the answer is that if you just had never done it, you wouldn't have had this. I will also say that I ended up having to quit smoking weed because of the legalization, because there was just enough friction before that to keep my use sort of very moderate, right? And once it was like literally on every corner, I was like, oh, well, I can get it here, I can get it here.
Yeah.
And then as a result, you just all of a sudden like, well, I'll just buy this vape. Then now it's in my jacket pocket. Well, I could pull it out and it would, I feel anxiety about whatever this thing that would resolve it. And ultimately, the amount of mental energy I was spending debating with myself was so much that I was like, the easier thing is actually just to stop entirely.
But now, if you get on a GLP, you'll be able to do marijuana without having the mental hamster wheel.
Yeah, I think.
I just interviewed Kessler, who's the former FDA commissioner, and we were talking about GLPs. He's lost 40 pounds, and just the mental energy expending towards food or whatever your addiction is, this really cuts it down.
I ran for a year a one-man clinical trial myself.
Did you wear a lab coat? Was there beakers involved?
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
good.
I had a little bunch of pencils in my
pocket.
pocket.
And the double-blind survey was what? Blindfolds, dark glasses?
And a visor, a poker visor.
Very good.
So I have always had really bad OCD, and the problem with OCD is they don't actually know anything about it, right? So the only treatment is they just throw a bunch of SSRIs at you and say this will sort of mitigate the impact, which it does. I take them, like I wouldn't not take them, right?
But then they change their.
But none of it they have none of the underlying cause, and so my thesis was the noise that you're getting for food or drugs or whatever else is maybe the same kind of noise that drives obsessive and compulsive thinking and behavior, and therefore, why couldn't a GLP deal with that too? And so I took Manjaro for a year, and the answer is I don't know. I think I felt better. It's tricky because, again, it's sample of one. It's totally psychosomatic, but at the same time, if it's psychosomatic on a psychological thing, maybe that's fine.
So it was a placebo that happened to be a real drug.
Now the problem for me was I lost so much muscle mass that it ended up not being worth it. And so I got off.
Were you working out less?
Not really. I just it was when I got to the point where the normal weights that I would do felt really heavy, then I was like, all right, this is a problem. All right, but I'll just end with one. You just give a quick one-word answer.
Okay.
Your least popular opinion about food?
Oatmeal is terrible. Is that
unpopular?
I don't know.
I kind of like oatmeal, but I like it because it's good for you. not because I like it.
Yeah, I don't like mushy
I mean, if
food.
oatmeal doesn't have stuff that's bad for you in it, it doesn't taste very good.
Yeah, I hate oatmeal. I hate risotto. I hate polenta.
So you don't like creamy, mushy things.
I like mashed potatoes. I don't know how unpopular it is. I wish I had.
If you didn't like mashed potatoes, that would be an unpopular opinion.
That's right.
Right. So maybe you reconsider, have some potatoes, decide you don't like them, and the next time we do this.
I have to come back I'll come back fiery on that one. Just give me a time to think about it. And if we do a part 2, that could be the entirety of part 2.
Just how you feel. Or just Mike
next
Pesca
week,
Mike
Pesca called in and he said that gummy worms are better than gummy bears.
Yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Firewall is recorded at my bookstore, P&T Knitwear, located at 180 Orchard Street on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We'd love to hear from you with questions, feedbacks, or idea for a guest. Just email me at bradley@firewall.media or find me on LinkedIn. And to keep up with what's on my mind and my latest writing, please follow my new Substack at bradleytuss.substack.com. Thanks again for listening.